Hi, I'm Fritz with Against Psychiatry and www.againstpsychiatry.com. That's www.againstpsychiatry.com. And what we are is a zine distro and website, and our purpose is trying to make information about the harms of the psychiatric system more accessible. And I'm a survivor of psychiatric abuse, so this is a really personal issue for me, and I have very strong opinions about this matter. But I'm not trying to force my opinions on anyone. I'm just trying to make information more accessible so that people can make more informed choices for themselves and their families. It's December 2007, and if you're interested in getting a print copy of the article that I'm about to read, you can email me. My email address is on the website. If you're interested in asking me questions about this article, you can email me. My email address is on the website. Or if you're just interested in reading the text of the article, it's on the website, and so are the footnotes, which are extensive, so that you can see that all the sources for this article are totally legit, and I've cited all of them. So it's a really good resource. Again, www.againstpsychiatry.com, and I'm Fritz. So this is what the print version of the zine looks like. And that's sold at some stores that carry self-published literature. And if you email me, I can actually send you one in the mail. There's two articles. I don't know how much time I have for this video. It's the first video I've ever made, and I apologize if it's a little bit primitive. So if it times out, then I'll just have to do a second installment. But anyway, Against Psychiatry. Uncovering the harms caused by psychiatric drugs, exposing the abusive and oppressive nature of the psychiatric system, and exploring what this means for radical identified communities. And the first article is called Better Than Well, and it starts with a quote from Robert Whitaker, who wrote Mad in America. I looked at the number of the so-called severely disabled mentally ill, people who aren't working. I wanted to chart through history the percentage of the population who are considered the disabled mentally ill. By 1955, at the start of the modern era of psychiatric drugs, roughly 1 out of every 300 people in the United States was disabled by mental illness. The disability rate has continued to increase until now it's 1 in every 50 Americans. From 1987 until the present, 2005, we saw an increase in the number of mentally disabled people from 3.3 million people to 5.7 million people. Combined spending on antipsychotic drugs and antidepressants jumped from around 500 million in 1986 to nearly 20 billion in 2004. And then I chime in. If psychiatric drugs are so effective at treating mental illness, and the use of psychiatric drugs is steadily increasing, then how can it be that rates of mental illness are also steadily increasing? Could it be that psychiatric drugs actually cause mental illness? If psychiatric drugs cause mental illness, then how could psychiatrists have not admitted this to the public by now? Is it possible that psychiatric drugs are deliberately being used to cause mental illness? Could the drugs which we are prescribed to make us get well actually be intended to make us get sick? And then I have another quote. Chlorpromazine has produced a decrease in brutality in mental hospitals, which was not achievable by any system of supervision or control of personnel, declared Anthony Sains of Marcy State Hospital in New York. Many patients, for example, when they develop a central ganglionic or Parkinsonian syndrome, become more sick and thus arouse the sympathies of those taking care of them instead of arousing their anger and hostility. The patients, in consequence, receive better care rather than worse. That's a quote from the 50s. In the 50s, when chlorpromazine, the first in a class of brain-damaging drugs that was later to be termed antipsychotics, was invented, doctors and scientists made no claims that these chemicals restored mentally ill subjects to normality or even treated any psychiatric symptoms. The purpose of these drugs was simply to control psychiatric patients, to render them passive and dependent, less troublesome for their jailers. In their praise of these new chemical control mechanisms, psychiatrists of the time lauded the new drugs by comparing their effects to that of a straitjacket, a lobotomy, or the dementia resulting from an infectious disease called encephalitis lethargica. Some psychiatrists noticed that patients receiving the high doses of these drugs, most effective at controlling them, were not merely sedated, but rather they were exhibiting symptoms of Parkinson's disease that made it almost impossible for them to control their facial muscles, talk, walk, or move normally. It was understood that in order to produce the desired sedating effect of the drug, it was also necessary for them to bring about a chemically induced Parkinsonianism. The psychiatrists thought that this was just peachy. Over the next decade, as economic policy shifted from the eugenics model of psychiatry, which had insisted on keeping psychiatrically labeled people segregated from society in mental institutions, to a modern model that did not wish to continue this expensive and no longer politically correct practice, a great propaganda campaign was initiated. Supposedly, a successful treatment for severe mental illnesses such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder had been found, and now, thanks to the advances of modern science, the mentally ill could return to the community. Liberated from their psychosis by these new miracle pills, they could once again become functioning members of society. When the decision was made to promote these new psychiatric drugs as a treatment for mental illness that could restore troubled people to productive lives, rather than as a chemical straitjacket meant for subduing them, psychiatrists quickly dropped all talk of dementia and Parkinsonian syndromes. Supposedly, these new drugs were nearly free of side effects, and although the process was still unknown, they somehow restored balance to the clearly unbalanced brains of psychiatric patients. In 1963, it was discovered that these antipsychotic drugs inhibit the activity of a chemical messenger in the brain, dopamine. So psychiatrists promptly reported that they had discovered the cause of psychosis. They rationalized that if drugs which effectively treated psychosis did so by reducing dopamine activity, then psychosis must be caused by too much dopamine activity. This unproven chemical imbalance theory is the origin of the convenient stance that mental illness is not a socio-political problem caused by widespread intolerance of variant beliefs and behavior, in addition to inadequate support for people dealing with issues such as poverty, discrimination, sexual assault, and family violence, but rather a biological brain disorder caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain, which can be corrected by psychiatric drugs. Psychiatrists continuously fail to mention the fact that they have never been able to demonstrate any noticeable abnormalities in the neurochemical systems of a mentally ill person prior to drug treatment, and that the neurological changes induced by their drugs are pathological. Okay, so the brain drugged with antipsychotics is robbed of the function of 60 to 90% of its dopamine receptors, and thus can no longer properly operate the three dopaminergic pathways necessary for normal neurological function: the nigrostriatal system, which initiates and controls motor movements, the mesolimbic system, which regulates emotion, and the mesocortical system, which connects portions of the brain responsible for reasoning and higher brain function. Antipsychotics cause a pathological deficiency in dopamine transmission. So, in this next section, I'm going to talk more about how that, the antipsychotics affect people. This next paragraph, I say, most of the symptoms we've come to associate with the mentally ill, the sleepiness, the apathy, the shuffling gait, the vacant facial expression, and the twitching, jerking movements are actually symptoms created by the antipsychotic drugs themselves. But I don't have time to continue on with this because I understand that on YouTube, videos can only be 10 minutes long. So right now we're at a little over 8.5 minutes. And I'm going to cut this video here, and I'm going to have to do the rest of the article in several different sections, and the second article also in several different sections. So this is part 1, and you'll just have to look for part 2, because that's going to have to be separate. But again, if you're interested in reading this in its entirety, just go to www.againstpsychiatry.com, and you can find the entire text there. Thank you very much for tuning in, and hopefully it won't be difficult for you to find the second installment up on YouTube, but if it is, again, just go to the website. Okay, thank you for your interest. This is Fritz with Against Psychiatry.